So yesterday we focused a lot on the building blocks that make up React, and today we're going to actually start using React in real life. It's going to be a very, very simplified version of React, but like John Gore was saying yesterday, and John is like some director of engineering at TableXI. They hire 15 or 20 engineers. React is the new kid on the block, and it is the one that everybody in the industry has more or less agreed upon. Like this is the framework we're to be using for a long period of time. And just to get you some ideas, like some amazing apps that are built using React Native. So there's React. React is for browsers, like for full desktop browsers like this. React Native is an extension off of React that allows you to write mobile apps using the React code. So again, it's just I learned React one time, and I can write for a browser like this, or I can write for my phone. And that's a really powerful thing. It's like learn one thing, do two things with it. The differences between React and React Native are extremely minuscule, and I'm talking like the library name is slightly different, and that's it. That's everything else that you're learning is going to directly transfer over. It's good for Facebook Ads Manager. It's Bloomberg uses React, Airbnb uses React, Gyroscope, Yantra, Uber Eats use React. Like Discord is like a huge one for gaming. I think definitely Instagram is one of the biggest proponents because Instagram's owned by Facebook. But in terms of like why this is useful, for a long period of time, people were hiring iOS developers and Android developers. And those were two separate people who, for a long period of time, because there wasn't something like React Native, they were able to name their own price. So it was like, I want to work 20 hours a week, and you're going to pay me full time, and I'm going to charge you $180,000. And that was something that they could do for really, really good mobile developers. But then, unfortunately, React Native came along, and they basically ate everybody's lunch. Where it's like, I can pay a JavaScript developer to learn React, and then they'll know React Native, and then we can create a mobile app just paying a web developer. So people are having a harder and harder time because React Native is coming out. If you want more customization, obviously you're going to go with, you're going to create your own iOS or Java app for Android.
So React Native, you can code it on the mobile, and it spits out both Android and iOS code?
Exactly, yeah. So again, React is for browsers, like on your desktop computer. It makes it super fast. React Native is a library off of React that allows you to write mobile code. It'll just automatically go into iOS and to Android, which is very crazy.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, let's get started with some code here. So I'm going to, just like we have with like Rails new and project name to create new Rails applications, we have a generator called Create React App. Create React App. And it's created by Facebook, and it's basically a library that spits out a React app for you, just like the bare bones of it. Obviously, you have to add things in order for it to run, but it lives right here. Create React with no build configuration. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to run npm install -g create React app. So npm, as you remember, is just the same thing as gem install. It's just called something different. So it's npm install -g is for global, and this is the Create React app you do want to install globally because you're going to be running it so often, and then the name of the package. So I'm going to just run this here. Could take a little bit of time. Any other questions on internships or anything? Oh crap, this is bad. Missing write access to blah blah blah. Any other questions on internships?
So there's only one that's guaranteed?
Two are guaranteed. Okay, so I've just done this. Yeah, the two are Change Healthcare and something else. I forgot. It's on the calendar. There's 3 companies coming in. 2 of them are guaranteed to hire. So I've installed the package on my entire machine at this point. I'm just going to run Create React App. And I'll just do buttons. I'll just call it buttons. So under desktop, they're going to create a new app called Buttons, and it's installing a whole bunch of stuff similar like when we were running that huge gem install Rails and then we did Rails new. This could take a little bit of time. So while I'm waiting, I'll actually go back and figure out which companies they actually are. And again, the power behind React is that it's really, really fast because it doesn't need to talk to the database. Most of the things that you do, like when you click a link here and there, like that's stuff that should already, like you shouldn't need to make requests when you hit back, right? When you start typing into a form and like you want to do something else when they're typing it in the form, like you shouldn't need to actually hit the server over and over again. The idea behind React is all of the code should live on your browser. And the reason behind that is just, there's simply just not enough space and money in the world for the number of people using the internet to actually hit the database. Because if you have 1 million people trying to hit one database or one service at one time, like sure, it should be able to handle it theoretically, but as that number increases, you still have one central point of failure. So what you'll do is you'll make one big request at the very beginning. Like if I go to, I know Instagram is instagram.com. I know Instagram is an app written in React. So is there anybody that you follow? I'll just go to DHH because I'm pretty sure that's, nope, I have no idea who this person is. Okay.
Some Italian guy. Wait a minute.
I don't think he's Italian.
Abdullah Al-Ghani.
Here, I'll just go to CrossFit. I'm sure there's somebody there. All right, so what happens is I will make one request to React, to Instagram, right? React, it'll make a request to the server and it'll load up this entire React app here on the front end. Now what you'll notice is when I hover over things like this, when I hover over things, the image darkens slightly, and then I have 18,000 comments and then 6, I don't know, conversations or something like that, six likes. All of this stuff is loaded into your browser immediately. So it's not like I have to go here and click on it to see how many comments and things of that nature that I already have. It's already loaded in. And only when I go down to certain parts of the board are they going to actually make subsequent requests. So it's I make one request at one time, and if I go all the way to the bottom, here's that infinite scroll, but the whole page doesn't reload. The whole page, the first half of the page stays the same, and they only make a request for the second half of the page. That cuts down on two things. You remember the old days of pagination where it was only showing 1 through 10 out of 100, right? Then you have to click number 2, and then it would make another request, and then there comes number 2. But what if you wanted your first page, right? Then you have to press back, and then, but by having React here, you only load the things that you absolutely need to load. And most of the code already lives on your browser. So when I click this thing, it is going to make a request in the background, but all of this extra stuff in the back is already loaded. It's just a new modal that pops up top. So that's some of the power behind it. Is this done? It's finally finished. So let's list out everything. We're going to go into buttons. And then I'm just going to open that here. Buttons. Okay, so it's very similar in terms of Rails because there's a lot of stuff going on. Just by running that one command, create React app, and then the name of the app, there's a lot of things going on. So first things first, we'll start at the top, node modules. Node modules includes every single bit of code that you're ever going to need for this React app. So all of create React app requires a lot of libraries. All of those libraries are listed here. And on top of that, all the code is also listed here. So your app, if you were to ever to deploy it, has every bit of JavaScript code that you're ever going to need to use in order to run it. And that's why things take so long to create, because there's just this much stuff inside of there. With things like Rails, the code doesn't live within your app. You actually are making requests outside to every single time that you need to use it. But for React, all of the code is here for you. Then we got public. Public is a bunch of public-facing assets like the fav icon. Fav icon stands for favorite icon, like a company logo or something like that. And then we got source. Source contains most of the meat of our application, specifically anything that has index in the front of it. So we have index.css. This is the CSS folder, CSS file for the entire application. Index.js is like, these things are loaded first and are the main entry points for our React app. This is a really important file that we usually don't touch that much. And it does two things. The import React statement imports like core React, like the entire React library from this React library found inside of node modules. And then import React DOM takes your code so that you can actually render out something out to the page. So generally speaking, index.css and index.js, these are your main entry points into your app. The things that we're going to be touching start with app. So if we just read this line by line, it looks a little similar to Rails code, and you can kind of more or less piece together what's going on. So line number 1, remember I said in order to bring in any sort of library or any other file, you do need to import on every line. That was something that Rails took away from you. Like if you wrote one file, you can have access to it everywhere. That's not the case here. Every single file you need to say, what do I want to import at the very top, and what can I export at the very bottom? So import React, and specifically a library called component from the React library. Second, I'm going to bring in the logo, which is this thing. If I were to preview it, you'd see it. It's just a picture. And then we're going to bring in the styling from this particular one. So there's no require and require relative. It's just import something. So this is the name of the library. I'm going to bring in logo from here, and I'm going to import this entire CSS. Then on line 5, we have class app extends component. What this is doing, the extends is basically the same thing as our Rails, like class app inherits from component. Two of the exact same things. So class app extends component means that app is going to be a child of component and is going to inherit all of the things from the component library from React. Now we've got a class, and you can have as much code inside of here as you'd like. This is a method called render. Render is required on every single React component, and basically is what's going to be rendered out to your particular page. Let's just run this. Let's just see what we get. All right, so I'm inside of buttons. I'm going to make this slightly smaller. I'm just going to run npm start. All right, so I'm starting the development server. It's popping up here on my screen over here, but it's actually just localhost 3000. Not sure what, there it is, finally. All right, and we got a basic React app that starts right off the bat. So this is our main app right here. So this is the class app found inside of app.js. And you can kind of see there's that welcome to React shows up right over here. This thing that's rotating for us is an SVG file. It's the one directly above it. It says image source and then logo. That's that logo from this logo.svg here on the left-hand side. So mostly every single React class is going to have two methods. One is going to be the constructor. It's the same thing as initialize, and then render. So initialize, what do I need in order to get this class started, and then render, what's coming out of the page. So let's create a quick button that will basically tell us how many times that we've clicked that particular button. There's a game called Click the Cookie. It's really annoying. Where it's literally, somebody created this and then I don't know how they make so much money off of this, but evidently this particular game brings in like tens of thousands of dollars a month. And it's like the stupidest game I've ever seen in my life. It's basically, how many times can you click this cookie? And then the more cookies the more times you click it, you get like all these extra like things, like you can have one that will click by, like, give you 5 clicks every other second or something like that. This is a stupid game, and then it makes tens of thousands of dollars because of these stupid advertisements down at the bottom. But we're going to create something similar where we can have the ability to click a button, and then from there see how many times that button has been clicked. So as of right now, we just have welcome to React. So well, let's just rename that for now. So we'll just get rid of this welcome to React, and we'll just call this button clicker or something like that. Refresh the page, button clicker. I want to get rid of this, and I just want to get an HTML button on the page. Grab this. Yeah, it looks like I could just grab this here. And then maybe I will just get rid of this portion right here. All right. Refresh the page. All right, we just have a button right over here. So we're going to start. So all I've done is I've just changed some words on the page, and I'm going to start everything by creating a constructor function. Constructor, which takes in props. I'm going to super props real quick. And I'm going to set state. This.state equals click count. I'm going to set that to 0.
What is that super?
Okay, so I'm going to go line by line here. All right, so I've got a constructor function. Constructor is the exact same thing like as initialize inside of Ruby. And every single constructor is going to take in some properties. Because we're going to, and super, what super does is it inherits the properties from the parent class. In our case, it's component. But if you were to like have one class that inherits from another thing, it's basically saying like all the properties that component has, I need in my class here. So I'm going to say that constructor is going to take in some properties. I'm going to inherit those properties. So this constructor props with the super props goes in on pretty much every single React, every single bit of React. Then I have this weird thing called state. So state is an interesting thing. Every single component has a hash called state. You initialize state when you initialize a new component, and we just declare it like this. So I'm saying whenever I create a new class app component, that each individual component is going to have an individual state, and that I'm just keeping track of the click count, and I'm setting that to 0. Does that make any sense to anybody? So again, I've got a constructor. It's basically the initialize. What do I need to do to get this class started? It takes in some properties. These 2 lines basically are going to be copied over every single time. And I'm just inheriting all the properties from component and bringing it inside of app. Every single component has access to state. It's a global hash that's available within this particular instance of app. So it keeps track of things like click count or other things that other important things that you may or may not need. I'm going to get rid of this. So I'm going to have a button right over here. Why is this gross? All right, I'm going to have a button that says click me. And then, actually, no, I'll just have a button that says I have been clicked X times. Real quick. I have been clicked X times. I can click it right now, and I'm not going to actually do anything. It's just a button that literally says I have been clicked X times. I want to replace this X with the number of times it's actually been clicked. So similarly, when we were interpolating things inside of Rails, we were doing things like, in our case, it would be like click count. If we were doing things inside of Rails, it looks like this. This was embedded Ruby, ERB. What I'm going to do is I need to interpolate JavaScript into this HTML, and that's using a similar templating system, and the acronym is JSX, which is embedded JavaScript. I just do a curly brace, this.state .click count. Again, this with the curly braces and this are identical. It's just slightly different syntax. All I'm doing is I'm interpolating this particular variable, which is 0, into my HTML. So I'm going to get rid of this, refresh the page, and it says I have been clicked 0 times. You can replace this with anything you want. I have been clicked poop times. Yeah. Again, all I'm doing is I'm simply interpolating the curly braces inside the render right over here. It means that I'm interpolating things. Similarly, it's just that percentage, that opening tag, and then the percent equals. I think it's also this inside of Python. So it's just another way of interpolating. So next, we want to record all the times that we've actually clicked this button. So what we're going to need is what's called an event handler. So if you were to go to like Instagram.com/CrossFit, certain things happen on the page when I do certain things, right? Like the page loads, and that's fine. But when I hover over a picture, you can kind of see real quick, there is a gray background that comes over this guy trying to do ring rows. And then these two numbers show up that I haven't seen before. Or if I go all the way down at the very bottom, JavaScript detects that I've reached the very bottom, and then it loads more things. But how does it do that, right? Like it does it for me, and we kind of take that for granted, but someone wrote the code to make that happen. When I'm here on my React app, when I click on this, I want it to increase the number of this number right over here, because right now it's just saying, hey, that you've been clicked 0 times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an event handler called onClick. So it's basically saying whenever I click this, I'm going to do this .handle button click. So whenever this button is clicked, I'm going to fire off this .handle button click. So I'm going to create a new function called handle button click. And just to get something out to the page, I'm just going to say hi. Again, all I've done, I have my button. It didn't do anything before. Whenever I click it, it's going to fire off this particular bit of code, this .handle button click, which reaches up here and just alerts you and says hello. All right, refresh the page. Hi. Very, very simple. Alert hi, it doesn't really help me that much. I want to actually update this particular thing. So what do you think the code is going to look like?
Count plus plus.
Yeah, something like that. Click count plus plus. Somewhere in there I'm going to have this.
You need to have this .state.
Yeah.
Click count.
Yep, this .state .click count plus plus. That makes sense. It's very similar, but you guys get the idea. It's like I have to find this variable, find the click count, and just increase it by 1. It's not 100% correct. It's just going to be this .set state, and then it's going to take in an argument. What do you want to do to the state? I'm going to say click count. Count is going to be this .state click count plus 1. So again, I've got my button. Whenever it's clicked, it fires off this .handle button click. You can name this whatever you like, as long as these two are the same, you're good to go. Whenever I hit that particular button, I'm going to say I want to overwrite the state that I started with, and I'm going to say I want to overwrite it so that I have the click count being whatever it was before plus 1 or plus plus. I don't know if this one is going to work. Maybe it will. We'll find out. So I'm going to refresh the page, and nothing happens. Let's take a look at the console. Okay, there we go. It says cannot read property set state of undefined. All right, so the reason behind this is that when you click this particular button, it doesn't have a concept of owner. It doesn't know what this actually is. Even though it's within the same class, it doesn't understand the concept of this. I'm going to explain this once today, and I'll explain it once tomorrow, and you'll probably not understand this for about a week. But inside of JavaScript, there is an unfortunate concept of this, and which is basically talking about what context are you in. So think about this for a second. You're in a nightclub, and you've been invited to the VIP area. There are certain things you're able to do while you're in the VIP area. You're able to eat fancy food and drink fancy wine. Those are things that you're available to do because you're inside the VIP area. If you decide to leave the VIP area and you walk up to the bartender and you say, I would like to eat fancy food and drink fancy wine, they're going to say, no, I don't like that. That's not something you're allowed to do because you're out here with the plebeians, right? You're here with the regular people. But what if you were able to get a wristband or something like that, basically saying like VIP? That means that you can easily go from one VIP area to the regular common area, and as long as you have that wristband, they have the context of where you started, and they know what type of person that you are. It's kind of like if you go to Disney World, you have like the fast pass lane, so you can cut the entire line. It's a similar concept. So it's once you have that fancy wristband, you can go to the bartender and say, I'd like to drink fancy wine, and they'll say, okay, let me see, like, you have a context of where you started. You know, they have that wrist wrap, and then you're allowed to go. Inside of render, since render belongs to this particular class app, and we're calling a function within a function here, handle button click no longer knows like who called it. So what we need to do is we need to bind this to this handle button click. So render knows, since render is a protected method within app, render knows the context of itself. It knows that this is equal to app. But once you have a function down over here, which is handle button click, the handle button click is just a random function inside of here. They have the concept of this inside of it, and it's not render, so they don't know what this is anymore. So you need to bind this to handle button click. Let's try this again. All right, so if I click it, nothing happens, but there's also no royal blowups anymore. Since I want to see some things showing up, I'm going to do console.log this.state.click count. All right, it's going to reload for me. It says I've been clicked 0 times. 0. Something is not happening. It's probably the plus, yeah, +1. Let's try it one more time. It's going to automatically refresh for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So right now I'm able to actually, I'm actually able to update this state over and over. And then finally, I'm going to, instead of doing this.state.click count, I'm going to see if this will actually, oh, I've been clicked 13 times, 14, 15, 16, and so on and so forth. You can kind of see, like, this is a very simple React app, but your server is not keeping track of how many times you've actually clicked it. It's just the browser that's keeping track of it. And that at a certain point in the future, it'll send a request in the background after you're finished with this. So we've done a lot. We've covered a bunch of concepts. Are there any questions so far? I just want to pause.
Yes.
Yes.
On naming your function, you put an underscore in the front of that. Is that preference? Is that industry like standard? So
what I've heard, and again, I've not written React professionally. I have reviewed it professionally, but I haven't actually written it yet. Anytime you have an event handler with on click, on mouse over, on focus lost, or something like that, on key release, on key down, on key up, like those are all event handlers. Anytime you have a custom one, just put an underscore in the front. Cool. All right, I want to, so because I want everything to be very much like single responsibility, again, single responsibility will pretty much be everywhere. I don't want everything living inside of app.js. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of the big code that I'm going to need, and then put it inside of a separate class. Real quick, split it up like this. I'm going to create a new file called new folder under source called components. Where the heck did it go? That's not where I wanted it. Okay. So I'm going to create a new folder called components. Inside of there, I'm going to create another folder called button component. And inside of there, I'm going to create a file called button component.js. So I've got button component.js, and I'm going to basically just pick out small things from here and there and just dump it in its place. So I know I'm going to need this first line. I probably don't need the logo or any styling. And I'm going to create a class called button component, which is going to extend from component. And I'm just going to more or less grab all of this. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I don't need to keep track of state anymore, so I can get rid of it. I probably have to take care of, I can probably move this from the app into here. And then the render is going to look a little bit different. And then I can remove it altogether over here. At the very bottom, since I need to call it on the outside, I'm going to do export default button component. So what I've done is I've taken all the code out related to the button from app.js and put it in its own individual file. Remember, every single component has its own individual action. So if you jump back over here, you just take a look at the Instagram one. There's probably a header component over here. There's probably multiple components. Like this is all, try to think of this as like, this is reusable code, right? Like they all follow the same thing. Insert a picture here, and then tell me how many likes there are and how many plays there are, and then how many conversations there are. Same thing over here. Here's a picture, shove the like the thumbnail of it, and then put the number, and then put the other number. Same thing over here. So it's like I'm reusing components over and over again. When I say that I heart this thing, it's only going to affect this particular component. It doesn't affect this one or this one. So right now I've got a button clicker and no button on there. So I want to bring my button component in. So I'm going to import it right at the top. So import button component from, and then I have to give the path to it. So I'm inside of app.js. I need to go inside the components folder, the button component folder underneath that, and then specifically button component, this particular file. I exported it so it's able to be used in other files, and then I've imported it so it's able to be used inside of here. All right, I get a few things from ESLint. Button component is defined but never used. I haven't brought it in yet. And this line 7, it says there's a useless constructor. Thank you for that. It appears that I don't need it if I'm not setting state or doing anything fancy. So it's going to compile again. It says button component is defined but never used. No problem. All I got to do is bring it in. Button component. Compiled successfully. I have been clicked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So I'm able to reuse this over and over again. Now, let's say I wanted to reuse my button component over and over again. Every single button component is an individual independent component. So each one is going to keep track of its own state. So if I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's say I had 10 button components show up on the page. Refresh the page. It automatically does it for me. I have 10 individual button components on the page. I believe there's 10 at least. Each individual one is going to keep track of its own individual state. It doesn't affect any of the other ones. And it doesn't ever need to talk to a database. And that's the kind of like the power between like reusable small components inside of React. we've got a ton of buttons. It's not very programmatic right now because we just copied and pasted code a bunch of times. So we're going to use JavaScript to iterate over a collection of components and then print them out on the screen. So I don't want this. This is too much. Yep.
That's just, is that bringing the button component, how you put it in the carrots and the slash?
Yep.
That's how you bring in the entire file?
The entire, so again, a button component is a class. The thing that shows up on the screen is all this render. So each individual time I'm calling the button with a slash at the end, kind of like an HTML closing tag, it's basically saying, bring in this entire class, and the thing that shows up on the page is under render.
Okay, so it's bringing in the class.
They bring in an instance of the class.
Okay.
Yeah. And for some reason, Visual Studio Code still tries to make this look fancy and nice, but this is what it looks like.
Okay.
So I don't want to do copy and paste 10 times. I'm going to just do a few things. So inside of render, return is what shows up on the page. If I want to do any sort of calculations or any sort of code beforehand, I have to do it above the return. So I'm going to do, let's just do 100 buttons. So let buttons equal that. I'm going to do a for loop for let index equals 0, index is less than 100, index plus plus. I'm just going to do buttons dot push button component. Then inside of here, how do I interpolate JavaScript? The curly brackets, buttons. So inside of render, remember render is what shows up, and then specifically what's inside of return is going to show up on the screen. I've created a buttons array, and I am iterating over it 100 times and just shoving 100 button components inside of buttons. And then down over here, I'm interpolating buttons. If all goes well, go back to my other page, and I see 100 buttons. Each individual button has its own individual state, so it will always keep track. Each individual component is going to keep track of its own individual state.
So if you refresh the page, are they all reset?
If I refresh the page, they are all reset. So if you wanted to keep actual track of that, like it's kind of like, you ever do those forms where it's like once you fill out, like you update your address and you click away from it, it says saved. Like you didn't even have to press the save button. There's JavaScript code in the background that's saying like when they mouse over, like when they leave this particular, like if I go to a form and I type in my first name and nice. If I go to a form and I type in my first name and I move outside of it and it says like saved successfully or something shows up, it's basically, there's an JavaScript event handler saying when the focus is lost off of this particular cell, send a request in the background saying to update the first name. It makes for a nicer experience, right? It's like as I'm doing it, it's automatically updated. I don't have to like fill it all out and then press save. So that's very, very basic React. We talked about quite a few things today. So just to reiterate, we did create React app, which is it's a generator given to us by Facebook. It creates an entire React app for us. The main entry point that we need to worry about is app.js. App.js is the thing that's going to show up on our screen. Each individual, like the power of React comes from individual components. Each individual component starts with a constructor and a render. The constructor is what you start with. The render is what comes out to the page. Each individual constructor inherits from component from React, so you need to super the props up to React. Each individual component also has a concept of state. It's basically a hash that's available within here that you can use over and over again. We talked about event handlers, things like on click or on key down or on key up or on focus lost or on page load or something like that. There's dozens of event handlers. The most popular one that we're going to use is on click. So whenever somebody clicks on this, fire this thing off. This.handleClick.bind this. We need to bind this because render knows where it is. It always knows where it is. It's inside a button component. But handle button click could be happening like within different levels. So if you ever see a method with this inside of it, you need to bind this, the concept of this, to that. That's going to make literally no sense for the next day. And then one day we'll click. So the concept is basically you're at a fancy nightclub, you get to drink, you're at a VIP section, you get to have Dom, right? That's what is available to you. When you go out to the regular people, you have to drink, what was it? We call it PBA, personal bottle of Andre. You have to order Andre for if you're in the regular people, right? And if you walk up to the bartender, you say, I want Dom, they're like I cannot give you Dom. Like doesn't make any sense. But if you have a context of who you are by having a wristband around it, it's saying like, oh, I like to order Dom. All right, see the wrist strap? You're allowed to have Dom. Similarly here, you're within the context of render, so you don't need to worry about this. You always know where you are. When I go down to handle button click, I'm inside of the regular people. Like this could be this is like this has no concept of this anymore. So when I call this dot set state, they're like, what do you mean? I don't know what that means. So you have to bind this to yourself when you're calling another function. You have to export whenever you want to use it elsewhere, and you have to import it whenever you want to bring it in.
Is that concept the same if you have within inside handle button click, if you have a double this, if that makes sense?
I have no idea what that means.
Like you have this dot set state, and then you have the click count is this state.
Yep.
But
what is the main thing you have to ask yourself is, what is this? Like what is this? Another way to think about it is when you're at the UN, you're no longer in New York, even though you're still in New York, right? It's the concept of like, where are you at this particular point?